Connolly, the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I swear, Mr. Fitton, listen to your testimony. It's like being in Alice in Wonderland. The idea that why are we here? So let's just put ourselves in context, because apparently none of this is happening in the real world. We just had a sentencing hearing in New York in which the president's personal attorney was given 3 years of jail time. This isn't speculation about what someone might have done. This is a crime admitted to. And in the sentencing, it was identified explicitly that individual number one coordinated and directed this illegal activity, for which Mr. Cohen is going to jail. Not speculative, not phony informants, not make-believe whistleblowers, not smearing or hearsay. This is now in the court record. You just made light. You almost dismissed, well, Russian interference in our election. That's a pretty big thing. And to compare the idea of somebody putting their thumb on the scales of justice in the Department of Justice to protect the Clintons, even though there's no criminal charge to that effect. And in fact, the FBI did look at it and found no there, not once but twice, Mr. Comey himself. We had Russian interference in our election. All of our intelligence community agrees with that. The FBI agrees with that. Most senior officials in the Trump administration with respect to foreign policy and law enforcement agree with that, except the president. We have criminal investigations, Mr. Fitton, not about the Clinton Foundation, but about the Trump Foundation. We have a ruling, and I'd like to enter that ruling, Mr. Chairman, into the record, from the Supreme Court of the state of New York saying there is sufficient grounds to go forward with a criminal investigation of the Trump Foundation, not the Clinton Foundation.
Without objection.
And we're not talking about it here because we're making a political point. Mr. Heiss says that's why we're here. Yes, why we're here is the grand Christmas miracle hope that we will distract the American public from the business at hand. That is grave and serious and undermines democratic institutions and norms. And Mr. Fitton, candidly, I would have expected more from Judicial Watch than your testimony. Mr. Hackney.
Can I respond briefly?
Briefly.
The concern is that...
I made a statement, but if you wish to respond, I will.
The concern is the investigation of Russia attempts to influence our policy in the United States is geared at focusing on President Trump to the exclusion of what happened, Russian attempts to try to persuade or guarantee a positive result on the Uranium One scandal, and Russian admitted efforts by the Clinton campaign to base its dossier that was used to spy on President Trump with allegations generated by Russian intelligence.
Yep.
So if there was a broad investigation into the full panoply of what Russia was trying to do with respect to both parties, I think Americans of both parties would be more happy with that.
I think, and unfortunately, because of the issue of time, I'd be glad to give you more time later, but I would just say this committee, the Republican side, had an informant on the so-called Uranium One thing, and they held him from us for 3 months, and oh my God, this was going to be explosive testimony. And when we finally got a crack at him on a bipartisan basis, his testimony fell apart. He had no evidence of criminal activity of any kind. In fact, no evidence of quid pro quo. And here you are repeating a slander that has no factual basis behind it. Meanwhile, we have court evidence with respect to what's going on currently. Mr. Hackney, my time is limited, your IRS background. So these two witnesses, Republican witnesses who are litigants to a lawsuit, not whistleblowers, coming next, they wrote the IRS with a one-page summary of their so-called interview with Mr. Kessel. And the result, the reaction of the IRS to that request was a denial of the letter, of the request. You know IRS. Why in the world would the IRS deny something like that? How should we read that?
So I won't talk specifically to any particular organization or circumstances, but in terms of thinking about the IRS assessment of any particular whistleblower claim, it's going to be a number of considerations. Particularly, did someone bring actual credible information that leads to something that returns tax dollars in some way? And they must be concluding, forgive me there, if the IRS has made that choice within a Whistleblower Act, the primary thing must be that no one is bringing something to the table there. And I do want to note, I just wanted to say to Vice Chair Heiss, I agree fully that this committee has an important role in oversight. So,
and Mr. Chairman, just a unanimous consent request. Thank the chair. Thank you both for testifying. I'd like to enter into the record our correspondence, Mr. Chairman. Our letter to you dated November 29th, requesting the broadening of this hearing. Your one-page response to us on December 4th, and our counter to that, our response to that on December 10th. I'd like to enter it into the record.
Without objection.
I
I
thank
don't,
you,
I don't
Chair.
know that I've seen the December 10th letter, but I'm sure I will.